The day my brother showed up at my door with a folder full of loan documents and my mother standing behind him like a shield, I knew something had gone very wrong. I just didn't know yet how wrong, or how long it had been going on. I remember staring at the numbers on the top page, $87,000. My name was on the cosigner line, a signature I had never written. I looked at my mother. She didn't look away. "We need you to make the first payment," she said, "just until your brother gets back on his feet." I closed the door on both of them. Then I sat on my kitchen floor in Mississauga and didn't move for a very long time. To understand why that moment hit me the way it did, you have to understand what my family looked like from the outside versus what it actually was. From the outside, we were a tight-knit immigrant family. My parents came from the Philippines in the 90s, worked themselves into the ground, bought a semi-detached in Brampton, raised 3 kids, my older brother, my younger sister, and me in the middle. My father drove for a courier company for 22 years. My mother cleaned houses until her knees gave out. They sacrificed everything for us to have a better start than they did. That part was real. I don't take any of that away from them. What was also real, though, was the way the sacrifices were always tallied. Every opportunity they gave us came with an invisible ledger, and somehow, no matter how many years passed, I was always the one who owed the most. My brother, I'll call him my brother because that's what he is even now, was the eldest son. That carried weight in our house that I can't fully explain to anyone who didn't grow up in a similar home. He could do no wrong. When he dropped out of college in his second year, my parents said he just needed more time. When he borrowed $5,000 from them and never paid it back, they said he'd been going through a hard stretch. When he started a landscaping business that folded in 18 months, my mother told me he had an entrepreneurial spirit. I meanwhile had a student loan, a full-time job as a dental hygienist in Mississauga, and a 1-bedroom apartment I was quietly proud of. I had a credit score I had spent years building carefully. I had a line of credit I had never touched. I paid my bills on time. I did not ask my parents for anything after the age of 22. None of that made me the favorite. It made me the one they called when they needed something. My sister was younger, still in school, still figuring things out. She mostly stayed out of whatever was happening between me and my parents. I don't blame her for that. She saw how things worked. She stayed small and safe. I had been getting small warning signals for months before that Sunday afternoon. My mother had mentioned casually that my brother was having trouble with his latest venture, something to do with a food truck he'd bought with a partner who then disappeared. I had nodded and said I was sorry to hear that. I had not offered money. I had learned by 31 that offering anything was an invitation to be asked for more. What I had not anticipated was that they wouldn't ask. The bank statement arrived on a Tuesday. I almost didn't open it because I thought it was junk. It came from a lender I didn't recognize. Not my regular bank, but one of those alternative financial companies that operates out of a strip mall and charges rates that should be illegal. The statement referenced a personal loan in my name, co-signed with my brother for $87,000. The loan had been taken out 4 months earlier. 3 payments had already been missed. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the clinic where I worked and read the statement 3 times. I called the lender directly. The woman on the phone confirmed the account, gave me the date it was opened, read back an address that was my parents' house in Brampton, said that the identification provided had included a copy of my driver's license and my SIM card. I said very carefully, "I did not open this account." She paused. Then she said, "You may want to speak with someone in our fraud department." I sat in that parking lot for another 40 minutes after I hung up. I was going to be late back from lunch. I didn't care. My hands weren't working properly. I kept thinking about my SIM card. I kept thinking about where I had last seen it. I kept thinking about Christmas 2 years ago, when my mother had borrowed my wallet to pay for something at the grocery store, because her debit card had been declined and she said she'd pay me back, and she did, eventually, but my wallet had been in her purse for almost 3 hours. 3 hours is a long time if you know what you're doing. I didn't go to my family first. I want to be clear about that. I did not call my mother and give her the chance to explain or cry or redirect. I went home after work, made tea, and called a friend of mine who works in financial compliance. She told me what to do, in order, without drama. File a report with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. Contact Equifax and TransUnion and put a fraud alert on my credit file. Contact the lender's fraud department in writing, keep records of everything. I did all of that evening. Then I called a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A lawyer who specifically handles identity theft and financial fraud. I found her through a referral from my compliance friend. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that she picked up when I called, listened to everything I said, and then told me in a calm, professional voice that what I was describing was a serious offense under the Criminal Code of Canada. That someone had used my personal identification to obtain credit without my knowledge or consent. That this was fraud. That the people who had done it could face criminal charges. I wrote down everything she said. My handwriting was very neat. I notice things like that when I'm trying not to fall apart. My brother showed up 2 days later. My mother was with him. I hadn't called them. I hadn't responded to the 2 texts my mother had sent asking if we could talk. I don't know how they knew I knew, but they did. People who have done something wrong always seem to sense when you've found out. It's something in the air, maybe. A change in frequency. I opened the door because I didn't want to have this conversation in the hallway where my neighbor could hear. I let them in. I did not offer tea. My brother put the folder on my kitchen table. That folder. I looked at it and then looked at him, and he could not hold my gaze. My mother spoke first. She said they hadn't meant for it to go this far. She said my brother had only needed a small loan and the lender wouldn't approve him a loan, and they hadn't wanted to worry me, and they'd thought they could pay it back before I ever found out, and everything had just gotten complicated. I said, you used my SIN number and my driver's license to open a loan in my name without telling me. My mother said it was still family, that the debt was still family debt. I said, my name is on that document. My credit rating is attached to that loan. 3 payments have been missed. That affects me directly. That is not a family matter. That is fraud. My brother finally looked up. He said he was sorry. He sounded like he meant it, and I believed that he did, in the way people are sorry when they've been caught. The remorse of consequences, not of conscience. Then my mother said the thing that I have turned over in my mind many times since. She said, you have a good job, you have savings. This is nothing to you, but to us it's everything. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the Christmas 2 years ago. I thought about the years of being the responsible one, the one who was supposed to absorb the family's failures, because I was capable of surviving them. I thought about my credit score. I thought about the condo I had been quietly saving for, the pre-approval I had gotten 6 months earlier, the way this loan would show up on my file and what it would do to that pre-approval. I said, I need you both to leave. My brother said my name, just my name, softly like a question. I said, I have a lawyer. Please leave. The next few weeks were not clean or simple. I want to be honest about that because I've seen stories like mine get told in a way that makes the person seem like they handled everything perfectly and never cried in a parking lot, or called their sister at midnight, or second-guessed themselves 17 times. That is not how it went for me. I cried. I cried a lot, actually. Not because I was going to give in. I had decided within 48 hours that I was not going to simply absorb this, but because it was my family. Because my mother had held my SIN card in her hands and made a decision, and I had to live with knowing that. Because my brother, who I had grown up with, who I had taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of a church on a Saturday afternoon, had signed my name to something and handed it to a lender and gone home and eaten dinner. Grief is a strange thing. You can grieve something and still refuse to let it bury you. I kept working. I kept making my own payments, my own bills, everything in order. My lawyer filed the necessary paperwork. She communicated with the lender on my behalf. I did not speak to my parents or my brother for 3 weeks. My sister texted me once to say she didn't know anything, and I believed her. I told her I loved her and that I would be in touch when things were more settled. My mother sent me a voice message that was 11 minutes long. I listened to it once. She cried for most of it. She talked about how hard my father had worked. She talked about how much she had given up. She said I was breaking the family. She said my brother had 2 kids and what was going to happen to them. My brother has 2 kids, a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old. I thought about them. I am not going to pretend I didn't. But here is what I also thought about. Those children's father had committed fraud. Those children's grandmother had participated in it. Whatever consequences came, they had initiated. I had not made this situation. I had only refused to quietly absorb it. My lawyer told me a few weeks in that the lender had confirmed the documentation used to open the loan had been fraudulent, that my identification had been used without authorization, that they were cooperating with the process, that a report had been filed and the matter had been escalated to the appropriate authorities. I asked what that meant practically. She told me it meant now a formal criminal process underway, that my brother could be charged, that my mother, if the evidence supported her involvement, could also face consequences. I sat with that for a while, then I said, "What do I need to do?" She said, "Nothing right now, let the process work." The call from my father came at 7 in the morning on a Thursday. I hadn't spoken to him directly since before any of this started. He had been quiet throughout, not absent but quiet. My father is a quiet man. He expresses things through action more than words, always has. He drove for 22 years without complaint. He fixed things that were broken without being asked. He showed up. He said on the phone that he was ashamed. Not of me, of what had been done. He said he hadn't known or hadn't let himself know, which he admitted was perhaps the same thing. He said he had overheard a conversation between my mother and brother 6 months ago and he had told himself it was nothing, and he had been wrong. He said he was sorry. I cried again. I'm not ashamed of that either. I told him I believed him. I told him I loved him. I told him I couldn't fix what had happened to protect anyone, including him. He said he understood. He didn't ask me to. We talked for 40 minutes, about nothing important, mostly. He asked about my work. I asked about his knee, which had been bothering him. He told me there was a blue jay that kept coming to the feeder he'd put up outside the kitchen window. I said I'd always liked blue jays. When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a while and didn't do anything. The formal outcome took 4 months to finalize. I won't walk through every legal detail because honestly some of it is still processing, and some of it I've been advised to keep private. What I can tell you is this: the fraud designation was confirmed. The loan was formally disputed and the liability was removed from my credit file. My credit score, which had dropped significantly during the process, was restored. The condo pre-approval I had been working toward was reinstated. My brother faced a formal criminal charge. I was not the one who laid that charge. The lender and the relevant authorities pursued it independently once the fraud report was filed. He entered into a process that I understand resulted in consequences I am not going to detail here. He has 2 children, I am aware of that. The system was also aware of that. These things are not mutually exclusive. My mother was investigated and ultimately faced no criminal charges, though her cooperation with the fraud, even if she told herself it wasn't fraud, even if she found ways to frame it differently in her mind, was documented. She knows that. She will have to live with knowing that the loan itself. My brother is responsible for repaying it. That process is between him, the lender, and whatever financial situation he navigates going forward. Not my problem. I say that plainly and without cruelty. I moved in January. The condo came through, a 2-bedroom in Port Credit, close enough to the lake that on clear days I can see the water from the kitchen window. I have a small balcony where I put a plant that I have so far managed not to kill. I have a door with my name on the buzzer and my name only. My father has visited twice. He brings things. A bag of mandarins the first time, a small framed photo of the 2 of us from when I was maybe 8 years old, sitting on the front steps of the Brampton house. I put it on my bookshelf. I cried a little after he left, but the good kind of crying, if that makes sense. My sister came to help me paint the 2nd bedroom. We ordered Thai food and sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and she told me about a guy she'd been seeing. And I told her she deserved someone who didn't make her feel like a backup plan. She laughed. We stayed up too late. My mother and I have spoken once, briefly. It was a phone call that lasted maybe 7 minutes. She said she missed me. I said I needed more time. I don't know what the future of that relationship looks like. I am not going to make promises I can't keep, including to myself. My brother I have not spoken to. I don't know when or whether I will. I'm not angry at him anymore, not the hot immediate anger I felt in the beginning. What I feel now is something quieter and harder to name. A distance, maybe, a recognition that some things once they happen change the shape of what came before them too. There is something I want to say about the credit monitoring service I had been paying for and which had not flagged any of this activity. I contacted them during the dispute process, and it turned out the fraud alert feature I thought I had enabled had not in fact been properly activated due to an error on their end. I documented that. I followed up formally. I received a partial refund and a year of upgraded service, and an apology that was more corporate than human. I am telling you this because if you have a credit monitoring subscription, please call them right now and confirm that your fraud alerts are actually active. Do not assume, confirm. I also want to say lock your SIM card, don't carry it in your wallet, keep it somewhere secure and do not hand it to people, even people you love and trust. Trust is not the same as safety. I know that now in a way I didn't before. The condo is quiet in the mornings. I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and watch the light come off the water when the angle is right. I go to work, I pay my bills, I call my father on Sundays. I don't know if this story has a clean lesson. I don't think it does, honestly. Life does not usually hand you a clean lesson. What it hands you is a decision point, and then another, and you make the choices you can live with and you carry them forward. I made mine. I'd make them again. That's enough for me.